What's going on, guys? It's Chris from Out West with Chris, and this is my Hobie Outback. It's a 2019 Outback, and I've had it for a year now, and I figure it's time to do an in-depth review. Okay guys, so what we're gonna do today is we're gonna take a look at this kayak behind me. I've used it quite a bit over the last 13 months. I bought it in December 2018. It's January 2020. But I have some thoughts on it after spending a lot of time in it, and want to go over those with you guys. After we look at its stock, I'll go ahead and just throw my stuff on it, show you how I typically do things with it. We're gonna look at the pros, we're gonna look at the cons, and we're gonna talk about a few things. So let's get after it. Okay, so let's just start at the very front of the kayak. It has a little grab handle right here. This is cordage, but overall it's held up pretty well. And it's a simple grab handle, nothing too fancy, but it works. Next, we're gonna look at this front hatch. And I do have a little like aftermarket feature to the hatch that you guys can pick up anytime and purchase, that I actually highly recommend. And this hatch is kind of an issue for some people. And sorry that, you know, we're going in and out of the shade here. It just is what it is. But that's how your hatch latches down. That's the inside. This is a bucket, so we'll go over that in a second. This is how it comes stock. You get this gasket here, so you got a little bit of hole storage right here in the front part of the kayak. This is where I store my battery. Let's get a good look at that. So that's where I keep my battery. I use a Naqua system. That's a 10 amp hour Naqua, and I have everything wired up to the front, and then I wrap the Naqua around the sail mast. So in regards to this front hatch, there's a lot of conversation out there, and rightfully so, that this kayak takes on water like crazy. This kayak's a pretty wet ride, and you'll get waves that come up and over, and then they settle in here. The water settles up top here as well, and then you get some drainage that it's designed to run down the sides, but inevitably you get quite a bit of water inside the hole, especially on a windy day, or like if you're out surf launching or something like that. Now, my understanding is that when you buy a new one, they've recognized this. You buy a new one and they do send out another gasket for right here. I, for whatever reason, have never gotten that gasket. I was told by the folks who sold it to me that they were gonna get one, that I was on a list, but I never got it. So I just have this gasket right here. I'm pretty sure that's how it was supposed to work, that I was supposed to get another gasket, but I'm not 100% positive. So just keep that in mind. Now, I think that a lot of the water intrusion actually comes right here. There's a couple of fittings, and if water's just sitting and pulling up there, I'm sure they're supposed to be sealed with something, maybe some silicone or something like that. But I could just picture water kind of seeping through some of these areas. There's also the attachment point for the bungees, and there is some sort of sealant on it, but I'm thinking that's where the water intrusion occurs, is through these. I don't see how the water would just jump up over that. Doesn't make sense to me. So my personal thought is that people are having these water intrusion issues through these little areas right there. And you can see there's some sort of rust. I don't know what that's from. So that's something to think about. I don't know why that's there like that. But you know, if that's not sealed off really well with some silicone or some other sealant, you'll get water through that pretty quickly. So I think that's where it comes from. So I mentioned before, this tub, I just store random crap in here, you know, nothing major. You can store quite a bit of stuff in here though. You can put your lunch in there, you can put ice and put some drinks in there. I highly recommend picking up one of those tubs though. Makes better use out of that whole area. Okay, so next we're gonna look at your cockpit. And that's pretty much everything right here. This is the cockpit. We'll start with the pedals, work our way back. So the pedals, you can see they've been used. This is the Mirage Drive 180. I actually had this pedal come off on me mid-trip several months ago. I managed to fix it, in air quotes, on the water, but it no longer does what this one does. This one will kind of bounce back to that position. There's some sort of spring in there. This one does not do that. So I didn't fix it correctly. I probably lost a part on the water. And one of these days I'm gonna order a whole kit and redo the pedals. This is the 180 drive, so you pull on this and you go backwards. Pull on that, you go forwards. It's pretty simple. This right here drops down your transducer, which is super handy for side imaging. It gets the transducer below the hole so that you could get a great side image shot with that side imaging beam. This one is for the rudder. They both act and operate like they should. You'll notice a lot of rail up here, and I love it. Tons of options for mounting stuff. You got tethers. I keep these Gerber braid scissors on a tether and keep them locked in right there. You know, all sorts of stuff. You could put Plano boxes here and wrap these little tethers over to this H rail. You can mount stuff directly to the H rail. You got mounting options here as well, and all of this has held up really well on both sides of the cockpit. I really like having options for mounting stuff. Sometimes I'll take a GoPro, mount it on a Ram Tough Grip on the rail itself, and it works great. I also really like having these plastic mesh, they call them a map holder pocket or whatever. I put my Procure in these, and I'll carry other odds and ends in them too. Here is the center hatch. Then you get a nice big spot to store stuff. So I've got Cliff bars and other stuff in there, just all sorts of odds and ends in this thing, and it gives you some pretty good hole access too. There's the cup holder here, and there's another one over there. They're draining, self-draining cup holders, so everything drains pretty well in this kayak. When I do kayak reviews, a lot of times people ask how many scuppers does something have. This has basically 6 scuppers, 4 traditional scuppers and then 2 non-traditional. And the main scupper on this thing is actually right here. That's basically a big scupper right there. So they don't have any scupper holes in the front because with the design of the pedal system on a Hobie, it just drains right into that void right there. I know we're going through things pretty quickly. There are other features. A lot of them are pretty minor. I just want to get through the main stuff. All right, so now we're going to turn our attention to the seat. Hey guys. The seat is pretty comfortable, actually. One of the more comfortable seats that I've ever sat in a kayak. It's kind of like a stadium seat setup, so it works pretty great. Lots of adjustability on this thing. There's lumbar adjustment on it. So this is the Vantage CTW, for whatever that means. So if you pull this lever right here, you can go down or up. I tend to angle my seat a little bit on the upside. It just works well for my legs for some reason. But lots of adjustment there. So it sits up on this little pedestal basically, and those little feet, and then you could drop it down, which is a couple inches, and then you can even drop it further. Okay, so next thing we're going to talk about is the rudder control. So this is where you control your rudder at. Let me drop the rudder really quick, and I want to kind of show you something. It's a dual control, so the side, both sides of the kayak have a rudder control, which is nice if you're fishing and you're holding a rod with your left hand. Hold the rudder with your right hand, and vice versa. I do have a problem with the rudder though. These lines just over time have gotten really loose. There's a lot of play in them, and that does cause some problems for me personally. We'll talk about those rudder problems in a moment. So transitioning back to the back of the kayak, you'll notice scuppers here, which helps drain this area. It does a fine job draining. No rear hole access. You can put in a rear hole hatch. A lot of guys do that cutout right here. But you know, bungees for securing stuff, a lot of attachment points. And you'll notice this right here, you can actually store a fairly large crate this way, crate, or even on an ice chest. All sorts of options, just a ton of options for rigging and storage. So now we're at the back of the kayak, and this is a spot where you can actually adjust your rudder, and I might do that in a little bit actually. Nice solid grab handle, pre-drilled for mounting a power pole. So here's a look at the rudder. It's a kick-up rudder, so this automatically kicks up if you hit a log, anything really. You hit land, pretty much any of that. All right guys, so one thing I do want to point out, sorry about the airplane. One thing I do want to point out is that when this rudder is up, it's pretty exposed to damage if you were to drop your kayak or anything like that, because it's not protected by the hull. It is exposed. One thing that I do when I'm hauling this thing in my truck is I always load it rudder first, and I bring the kayak out nose first. That way I'm not dropping it on the rudder all the time. They do make a little plastic thing, I forget what they call it, the kickstand or something like that, that clips onto this rear grab bar, and it gives you a little protection for loading and unloading. So I don't use that, I just load rudder first. It's a little dinged up, but you know, it's still hanging in there, so we're good to go doing it that way for me. All right, there it is, basically fully rigged with pretty much everything I take when I go out. This right here is a little roto grip. I think it's a Yak Attack roto grip, but I use that to secure my net, and I leave my net up front. It's really quick to reach. You might be thinking, oh my gosh, that's a huge net, and it is, it's pretty big, but I've netted a few decent sized fish with it, so it's good to have a big net, I think. There's your paddle with your paddle park. It's always a good idea, even though you might not think you need it, it's a good idea to have a paddle with you when you're out on a pedal kayak. There's the fish finder. That's the Lowrance Elite TI2. It's all set up with the wiring into the hole. You can see over there. I have a video on how I set up the Elite TI2, the transducer, how I did all the wiring. So I'll put a card up and a link in the description. And yeah, this is how I carry rods. I typically carry 5, sometimes 6. And yeah, I'm rocking the super old school milk crate still. And it seems to do just fine for me. And it secures through this bungee system. Just like that. Now I know if I tip, I'm screwed. All of that stuff is gonna pop out. And so will my rods, because they're not tethered. But that is how I roll. So living life on the edge all day, every day. Man, that shadow is awesome with my camera right there. Okay, that's better. So the pros on this kayak. This thing is extremely maneuverable. It's also extremely quick. It's not the fastest kayak that Hobie makes, or the fastest kayak that you can find out there, but you know, this thing hauls butt. I can cruise at 3 to 3.5, 4 miles an hour, probably 3.5 without too many problems, and I can get this thing up to just about a 5-mile sprint. And I'm a pretty big dude, right? I'm not a small guy. And another thing is, even though I am a pretty big dude, 6 foot tall, 270 pounds, I have never worried about stability, except for in a few situations, which I'll get to. And I have plenty of room. The cockpit feels nice and comfortable, cozy. It's just a pleasure to be in this kayak. I think possibly the cockpit layout is one of my favorite things about the kayak in general. I think it's just extremely well designed. How easy everything is to get to. It's just well thought out, well planned. All right, so let's go into some of the cons, and we're going to talk specifically about a few things. And one thing is pretty obvious once you start fishing out of the kayak, And it's that these rod holders, the built-in rod holders, which there are 4 of, 2 on each side here, these 2 up front. And those up front ones actually come in really handy, but they're not that deep. So they're about, I don't know, that's probably about 6 inches deep. And that might seem like it's enough, and it probably is. I haven't had anything bounce out before, but I have felt like on numerous occasions that I was gonna lose a rod because of it just popping out. You know, in some chop, or you know, situations where you might lean a little bit or something like that. It just seems like these aren't really in there that well. That's a very minor thing, I know, but it's something, and I'm sure other people have felt that way. I'm not making a big deal out of it, but I do feel like I need to bring it up. The other thing that's kind of obvious is that whole water into the hole issue. I mean, I've seen some really nightmarish videos on YouTube of guys getting a ton of water into their hole. I haven't had that problem. Maybe a cup of water has gotten in at a time, but still, that's more than I really want. I want a water-free hole as much as I can. Now with that extra gasket, which I still haven't gotten, it might not be a big deal, but you know, I think that if any water gets down in around those fixtures, that's gotta be where the water's leaking in my opinion. The other thing for me is it's kind of a maintenance wear and tear item. So it's not that big of a deal, but it's one reason that I think, you know, guys who get in a kayak and they paddle it 2 or 3 times, spend, you know, 6, 7, 8 hours in it, and then do a review on a kayak, I think those reviews don't do anybody any service. 6 months, 3 months, you know, that time period of dedicating, getting to know a kayak and really wearing it, that's when you start to see issues. That's when issues pop up. 6 months in, 3 months in, you know, that type of thing. And this whole rudder issue is actually kind of a big deal for me, because one of the things that's alluring about fishing out of a Hobie is hands-free fishing, right? You could troll without having your hands busy, or you know, you can move from spot to spot or make incremental adjustments in an area while you're fishing with your hands on your rod and your reel, right? Well, with this, you can't really. If you're going at any speed whatsoever, I have to have my hand on the rudder control just to keep it going in the direction I want to. The second I let off, because there's so much slack and it's so loosey-goosey, it'll veer, it'll turn. And one thing about this kayak, I think that I can throw myself out of it. I don't think I can tip it over, but I think if I got going fast enough in this kayak and I made a sharp turn, I could throw myself out. I don't think it would turtle, but I think maybe it's because I'm a big guy and I have a high center of gravity. I think it would send me. And there's been a few times where I felt like, whoa, you know, like it was close. One of these days I need to test that out, just get out in the summertime on a, you know, a lake that's not freezing cold, take all my gear out and just go see if I could dump myself doing a turn at full speed. This thing turns so sharp. So if you're going 5 miles an hour and you make a turn in the water, you know, stuff's gonna kind of get tippy. But back to the rudder. That's just kind of, I think, a wear and tear thing. I am actually gonna try to adjust it, hopefully today when I'm done with this video. And hopefully it's not a pain in the butt and it's easy to fix, because, man, having all that slack, it's just a pain. You know, all the other features of the kayak, from you know, the rudder release, the transducer pod release, you know, just all of that stuff. I forget the official name of that thing, it has one. You know, wear and tear on the kayak, you know, the drive itself, I've had 0 problems with over the last year. And I know drives will break, it'll happen eventually, but I haven't had any problems with anything other than the rudder mechanically on this kayak. And I think that speaks volumes. I've used it a ton and it's done great. One more positive thing that I forgot to mention earlier. This kayak is actually really great at fishing really weedy spots, and a lot of propeller style pedal kayaks and a lot of pedal kayaks in general don't do good in the weeds. It gets all gummed up in the pedals, but because of the fins on this thing and being able to get those fins parallel with the bottom of the kayak and then flipping them just barely, you know, it allows you to skim over the surface of weeds. And I've fished some super thick weeds in this thing and never had to pull the drive out. But when I do pull the drive out, another positive is this thing paddles amazingly. This is a great paddle kayak. Just so happens to have a Mirage drive in it. Well guys, that's gonna wrap it up for me. I know I've missed some stuff. So chime in what you like about this kayak if you own one. Chime in what you don't like about this kayak if you own one. And let me know what you think. You know, I highly recommend this kayak if you're looking at getting in and if you have the money. It's they're not cheap, you know, they're around 2,200 bucks, maybe more, 2,600 bucks. I can't remember how much I paid for it. It's been a little while, but you know, you're looking at around $3,000 to get into this thing. And you start adding in fish finders and all that stuff, and you're looking at, you know, somewhere around 35 to 4,000 bucks just to get it all kitted out. All right guys, I have a tendency to ramble on and on and on and on and on, so I'm just gonna shut up now. Thank you guys for watching. If you have any questions or comments, leave them in the comment section down below. Thanks for watching, and thanks for getting out west with Chris.